so today we're going to put this new alternator, which we've polished to look like a chrome alternator. We're going to put this back into the 79 Super Beetle. You see we've taken a lot of parts out, and there's a lot of cleanup to do. And as we were removing parts, we found some topical rust and stuff. So we're going to treat that as we go. So the first step in that process is to put this backing plate on. It goes onto the back of the alternator back here. There are three pieces to it. There's a shim spacer, there's a front plate and a back plate. The front plate is what you see from the engine. This part right here, we're going to nice coat of paint on, but it's got a couple of old coats of paint on it, so we're going to sand it flush so that it takes that new coat of paint nice and shiny. Also, you can see there's some rust. And so the technique that I like to use when I'm mitigating rust is to take those parts and clean them off of any grease or oil and douse them directly into a vat of this concrete and metal prep. This is a phosphoric acid. The phosphoric acid converts the iron oxide into iron phosphate, and that becomes inert, and it'll stop the rust in its tracks. And for those places where the rust is loose, it'll completely just brush right off. So we'll give that a couple minutes in there. We'll take it out, rinse it, and then give it a quick coat of paint. As one of the things that this stuff does is it etches the metal and makes it oddly more susceptible to rust. So either you can spray a little WD on there to give it an oil seal, or you can throw a little bit of paint. In this case, we're going to throw a very light coat of high-temp engine paint on all of these components. The back plate here has a sort of a flow. I don't know if you can see, this piece goes on like this. The shim is on the inside, but you can see there's a gap in here, right? And at the bottom of this, you can see there's a vent. This little vent right here goes, when you orient it, you want that to be on the bottom. What that does is it doesn't actually blow air into the alternator, but it sucks air through these vents. And with a negative vacuum, as the air moves on the back of this plate here, it creates a negative pressure that will suck air through the alternator and keep it cool. So make sure this is all cleaned out. We're going to mitigate this rust as well. Throw a very light coat of high-temp engine paint on there, and then we'll get that assembled. So let's go ahead and get that taken care of. All right, so here's after just a couple of minutes in the acid. Did a great job. I rinsed this out in the sink, and I'm not going to paint this one. This is a spacer that goes between two other painted items. So instead of allowing the paint to become a sandwich and create get everything all stuck together, I'm going to just coat this with a very, very thin coat of WD-40, and that will keep it from flashover rusting. So anyway, some comments about dealing with acid for rust mitigation. So there's some real obvious safety things to take into account. It's acid, so don't get it on your skin. Use a rubber glove. Also use some face and eye protection to keep, in case you get splatters. And when you're not using it, make sure you put a cover on it. So use a container that can be covered, and then when you're all done, put it back into a safe container so you can make sure that it's not going to be a liability in the shop. All right, move forward. So once we get ready to install this fan and alternator into this fan shroud, we're going to want to clean this thing up first. So the very next step, and while we're waiting on the other stuff to paint to dry, I'm going to go ahead and take some brake clean and get all the grease and oil and nastiness off of this, and then I'm going to sand up some of these little rust spots and make sure that it's nice and smooth, and we'll take another coat of paint. We're going to just put a light coat of high temp engine paint on this just to keep it looking fresh. And also it protects it from any kind of rust. And you want to make it look like you were there, so you got to improve it every time that you're fixing it. So that's the next step here, is to clean this baby up with some brake clean, get all the grease and oil off of it, and then prep it for some paint. All right, that looks a lot nicer. So let's get this thing back together. All right, so this little spacer goes kind of like this with a little ridge going up. That ridge is going to go underneath, and it's going to mate up with this little ridge. So there you go. That's got to go up. Now you also want to keep track of where this little gap is. So that's going to be on the bottom. So when you mount this thing into the fan shroud, this vent goes down. All right. So let's line these things up, and here you go. And on the back of the alternator, you see there's a couple of screws. Those screws go right into here, and then a couple of nuts on the back. So here you go, see, got the nuts, or got the screws going through the thing in the back. But what you'll notice here is the top of the alternator is lined up with the bottom of the vent. So this is wrong. We need to turn this 180 degrees around. There you go. Got the vent on the bottom. Got the positive post on the top. All right, let's get those screws in, those nuts on there, and move on to the next step. All right, this next step here, we're going to get it ready for the fan. So let's go ahead and lay out the materials that we're going to need. So first of all, you have this bushing that gives you this slotted little slotted recess here for the fan. It has this goes right on there on the shaft. Make sure that you have a keyway on here. If you don't have the key in there, make sure that you don't. If your alternator didn't come with a key and you've already turned in your other alternator for a core exchange, you're not going to have a key, because you have to make sure that you don't lose your key. So anyway, that keyway goes right in the little slot right here. Just line that up, it should go right in. All right, so resuming. This little bushing goes on first. Make sure you have so that the flat side is on the out, so that it can get connected to the next little piece here, right? The fan connects into here with this little flat section. Now, when I took my fan out, it had 2 shims. So I'm going to reproduce that, assuming that the geometry of the rest of the mechanism hasn't changed. And so I'm going to put 2 shims on there, and then grab the fan. Before you put your fan back on, make sure that you've inspected it to make sure that there's no debris, anything stuck in there. I am not going to treat this for rust or put any paint on it or anything, because I don't want to change the weighting or the balance. So we're just going to go with it, right? All right, so you see the little flat spots? That fits in there like that. All right. Bada bing, just like that. Now you take your extra spacers and you throw them on there, and then you need to put this little lock washer on. Now when you're looking at this lock washer, you might notice that it's not flat. There is an inside and an outside on this. It's like a slight cupping on it, right? You want the cupping to go in, because what's going to happen is the nut is going to catch on these flat edges, and it's going to keep it. So it's kind of like a lock washer. So go ahead and put that with the cupping in. Line that baby up. Here we go. Now 36 millimeter bolt or nut goes on there. All right, I'm going to finger tighten this. Okay, you hear that noise? That's not the desired effect. We don't want any skimming like that. So we're going to take it off. We're going to take one of these extra shims on, and we're going to put another shim on there. All right. Really good example. So we have 2 more shims here. I'm going to try one more. Well, actually, I have 3 shims here left. I'm going to put one more on there, and we'll see if we can get that to not scrape. Put 3 shims. There are 2 shims on here. These are really thin shims. You see we got 2. We're going to add 1 more. There we go. Our little washer. The cup side in. Okay, finger tight. Still getting some rubbing here. The funny thing about this is I think it might have just been this was loose right here. It might have just been that I was leaning on it right here. I think that seems pretty good. Yeah, it's just because it was leaning on it right here. So you can see, without putting any pressure on this, you want to make sure that it'll spin free. I'm happy with that. Now, the thing about this is that we're going to go ahead and bolt this into the fan shroud, and we're going to test it again because there's a tolerance both ways, right? You can shim it more on this side or more on that side to move the fan back and forth. Obviously, we don't want to reproduce what we had going on before, but that was because it was loose. But that's what that should look like. All right, let's go ahead and throw this on the fan shroud and then do another test. Make sure we got those shims right. All right, so before I put the fan back into the shroud, I'm going to go ahead and torque this. I've got a 36 millimeter socket on my torque wrench, and my torque wrench is set to 32 foot-pounds. It's not really easy to hold on to something while you're torquing it, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little crescent wrench in here so that it will keep it from turning. And let's go ahead and get this, and then we'll check it to make sure that the shims are right after we've got the torque on there. All right. All right, there's a little clickety-click. Hang this off the side. Little tick, tick, tick still. You can see that the fan has a little bit of a wobble to it. Maybe we need to look at that wobble. Anyway, what you need to do is adjust the shims in and out to make sure that with it torqued at 32 foot-pounds, the fan doesn't hit this little mounting plate. And then once we get it into the fan shroud, you do the same test to make sure it's not touching on this side. You just need to get a good balance between those shims. All right, so there you go. I've managed the shims. I have that 36 millimeter nut torqued to 32 foot-pounds. And you can see I'm spinning it. There's no rubbing on the back side, no rubbing on the front. We're free and clear. So that's good to go. Now the one thing I want to point out on here is, if you recall, the top is up here, which means that the vent is right there. Okay, so just make sure that you get that right when you put it back in there. There we go, right back in spot. All right, a couple 10 millimeter bolts in here, and then we can progress with the project. All right, so I think that's enough to cover in this video. Just a quick summary. We went ahead and installed the alternator onto the fan shroud and then mounted the cooling fan into the shroud, cleaned it all up a bit. A little spray paint always helps. We're in the next steps here. We're going to go ahead and mount this thing back into the engine compartment here, and you can see that's where the fan shroud goes, right into those slots, and then it cools off the engine through those cooling fins. But we had a lot of work to do before we get to that. You can see a lot of dirt to clean up. This wiring harness with this old nasty brown cable management. I think I'm going to strip away this brown cable management and put something newer on it. It just looks old and aged, and so I want to put something a little fresher on there. So anyway, I got a lot of work to do before we get to the point where we're going to go ahead and move this fan shroud in. So I think the next video, what we'll do is we'll do the fan shroud installation, and then maybe some of this wiring. I do have to clean out this throttle body. Man, that thing is a mess. And remount the EGR valve. There's some other cleanup to do in here. But yeah, it really made a mess with all those metal shavings. You can see down in there's a lot of stuff that needs to be cleaned out. So that'll be the next task. I don't think that we'll be able to slide that into this video and still make it a reasonable size. So there you go. That is the installation of an alternator into the fan shroud on a 1979 Super Beetle Cabriolet. Convertible, white on white. Love this car. Anyway, there you go. Check back and subscribe for more.